and welcome back to part 2 of the Geneva Dialogues, and in this section we are going to be talking about skeletons. I suppose we're picking up from where we left off in the first part with Jaeger LeCoultre.
Yes. Well, it's definitely more of an ornate sort of decoration to a watch rather than being functional. And if you look back at the roots of skeleton watches, it dates back to 18th century France during the period of the French Enlightenment. So I guess there was this curiosity where people wanted to know how a watch worked, and thus the idea of a skeleton watch where all the moving components are visible was born.
For an enthusiast looking into the history of the skeleton, where does one start?
I mean, this is something that is sometimes disputed, but I mean, the general consensus is that the first skeleton watch was created by French watchmaker André Charles Caron in 1760.
Looking at the manufacturers that represent the technique of skeleton making today, I mean, again, where does one begin one's search for the ultimate piece?
You raise an interesting question, Mike, because quality is already difficult enough to judge on its own, right? And some of the brands that are renowned today for their skeleton watches might not have been one of the earliest producers of skeletons either. So one of the first watches I'd like to show you that was unveiled during SIHH last January is Vacheron Constantin's Métier d'Art Mécanique Ajouré, which is French for open-worked mechanic. So here Vacheron Constantin have taken a sort of, it's a very traditional looking watch, but at the same time it does have a twist. So this particular timepiece collection is inspired by European railway clocks of the 19th century. And what Vacheron Constantin have done is true skeletonization, and that is where you take a traditional caliber, and what they've done is actually sort of very carefully, carve out and cut out all the unnecessary parts of the movement where you can have a beautiful structured look as this. Speaking to one of my inside sources at Vacheron Constantin, he informed me that the Cal 4400, which is a traditional looking movement, was actually conceived from the ground up for skeletonization so that it would give an incredible sense of depth when skeletonized. And in this particular collection, what they've also done is added, again, an enamel ring just underneath the Roman numeral hour markers, which gives it really a very three-dimensional look. And really, personally, it is one of my favorite watches from the SIHH fair.
The next one I'm particularly pleased to see because it's a brand that we're big fans of as well. And it really takes us to the other extreme of the art.
Well, again, Arnold & Son is, I would say, a sort of exceptional brand within the watchmaking industry, simply because, unlike other brands which claim to have a French or Swiss heritage, they actually come from an English company. So the particular piece I'd like to show you here is their time pyramid. Now, the original watch in red gold was unveiled during Baselworld of last year, but in the last few months they've come up with a steel version with a sort of more modern, edgy, grade-treated movement. And what's interesting is that unlike other watches which sort of take a pocket watch inspiration and readapt that into a wristwatch, Arnold & Son have taken inspiration from English skeleton clocks of the 18th century, so from the same time that John Arnold was around. And as you can see, I mean, as the name befits it, the time pyramid, it has a unique structure, pyramid-shaped, absolutely gorgeous watch. The
last piece that you want to share with us is something of a surprise because it's certainly not a brand that I would immediately associate with making a skeleton timepiece.
Well, as you know, Romain Jérôme is a brand that's better known, or should I say notorious, for their Titanic pieces, their Apollo 11 infused pieces and such. What they've come out with just before the end of last year was a piece called the Skylab. Now, as the name implies, this is implied by NASA's first ever space station, which actually just celebrated its 40th anniversary last year. The Skylab is particularly interesting to me, at least, because I think as far as skeleton watches go, you can immediately see a big difference between this and, for example, the first Vacheron Constantin piece we showed. So here you go, like from tradition to ultra-modern design. And the particular skeletonization on this, if you notice, it only has right angles on the movement bridges and such, and it's actually inspired by circuit boards of computers and such. And it's honestly, in the metal, it's a really, really good looking piece. And because it is Romain Jérôme, their slogan is DNA of famous legends, you actually have bits of the Apollo 11 incorporated into the steel case.